Hi there guys, Joyful Rogue here. If you've been watching my Duelyst stream, then since the release of the Gauntlet, I have been having some pretty ridiculous results. I have ended the runs with 9 wins more often than I have ended them with 3 losses, giving me over 80% win rate. I've been doing good for myself. Yes, to some part it was because the matchmaking has been giving me easier opponents because I wasn't laddering as much. It was now patched. I'm here to talk about the other part of my success. How do you apply skill to maximize your Gauntlet results? There are some patterns I've been noticing in my decks, the winning ones, and for a while I've been screenshotting those patterns in order to show them to you in a tutorial. So first I'm going to share with you some general rules about what you should do when you're building and playing a Gauntlet deck, and then we will go into specifics of how to win with some factions. As a general rule, you need to think about what Gauntlet is compared to the ladder. The cards and the decks are more chaotic, more random. You're going to see some really weird stuff that sometimes doesn't happen on the ladder, and some standard practices, like having 3+ silences, isn't gonna occur as often. So those cards that are more vulnerable to removal or more vulnerable to silence, like for example the High Hand or Lionar's Second Son, are going to be more efficient on the Gauntlet than they are on the ladder. Also, the Gauntlet is much more momentum based because less players have a chance to get a comeback mechanism into their decks. So strong, beefy, neutral golems are also more efficient in the Gauntlet, and removal and comeback mechanisms are basically gold. You always prioritize those because they are so rare and so precious. As a general rule that I always go by when I'm building my decks is I want to make sure I have a very solid base of 2 and 3 costing minions. I want 6 2 costing minions and some 3 costing minions to boost that as well, so that I can make sure that every single game I have an opening. I very rarely, almost never skip my first turn, regardless whether I'm going first or second. The higher value, in my opinion, are the 2 costing minions, because having two costing minions in your hand when you're going second, when you have 3 mana available and 4th one through the mana node, allows you to play two costing minions on the same turn, which is a really strong play, stronger in my opinion than playing a single 3 costing minion. So I value the 2 costs even more than 3 costs. Unless you can squeeze in some high value 1 costing minions like the Maw, in which case it's a very efficient turn 1 play for the second player to play a 3 and 1 costing minion, but I like to prioritize my 2 costs. And my absolute favorites are the Shaman, the Azurhorn Shaman that gives a ton of HP to everyone around him when he dies. A lot of players don't really know how to play against him correctly. If you can suicide your Shaman, summon units around him and then suicide him into the enemy units, you're gonna get a very solid mid-game. You're going to be in a very good position to win the game. The healer, the healing mystic, is another minion I really like because he scales well into the late game. That little bit of healing can get you out of the lethal range in the late game, as well as actually heal your minions in the early game. When I'm still fighting for board control in the early stages of the game, I use that healing mystic to actually heal my minions in the beginning of in the beginning few turns to establish a solid board control, instead of healing my hero from 23 back to 25, which isn't gonna make a difference. So that's a huge versatility for that cost of 2, and at 2-3 is solid stats. And then Primus Fist is just ridiculous. It's such value in both early, mid, and late game. When you can maybe boost a couple of minions in the late game, he's still solid. He can sometimes give you lethal, and in the early game, he's still a 2-3 cost minion. Even if you play him as the first minion of the game, he's still good. So those are my favorites, the Shaman, the Healing Mystic, and the Primus Fist, but there are plenty of like decent-ish minions. For each faction has their own strong things, like Vanar here. The the Fenrir's, the 3/3 that spawns another 3/3 is just like the best 3 costing minion in the game, and you just take them every single time because they win you games, they win you arena runs, they win you gauntlet runs. So the faction-related ones I'll cover later. The second rule is to prioritize strong, muscular minions for the mid and late game. Minions like the High Hand that people have less removal and silence against in the Gauntlet. I really like the High Hand. For the cost of 5, you get like a 7-8 minion or something. It's ridiculous. The golems are actually decently valuable as well. The mid-game golems. The Blood Shard and the Skyrock not so much, but the Hailstone and the Moss Golem are... 4 damage is all you need more often than not in the mid-game, and their health guarantees it 2 or 3 trades. It's oftentimes someone who drops that golem early can dominate the mid-game if there's no way to deal with them. It's pretty solid. So those golems should totally be on your radar, and there are some class-specific minions as well, but prioritize the muscle. The Dancing Blades is one of the best, if not the best, 4 or 5 cost mid-game minion. You get removal and a 4/6, which is very solid stats, for a very, very cheap comparable cost of 5. Like, you basically get a Hailstone Golem and you pay only 1 to deal 3 damage. It's ridiculous. It turns the board around, giving you a solid minion and removing something of your opponent. It's one of my highest priorities for picking as well. So the blades, the golems, an Emerald Rejuvenator is a very efficient minion. A 4/4 is, it's like decent enough to be worth it on its own, but I always hold him in my hand until I can get the maximum value of the healing. Because if your opponent has no healing and you've got a couple of Rejuvenators in your deck, that gives you some solid advantage when you're both brawling and trading against each other. It's usually a pretty high value pick for me as well, the Rejuvenator. So keep that on your radar as well. And I'm going to be covering those for each faction, but make sure you've got a win condition. Every faction has a win condition, a way for you to win the game, not just through controlling the board completely and slowly brawling your opponent to death, but a strong gimmick can sometimes be all you need, even when you're losing. Speaking of which, though, be careful with 2 gimmicky decks. Like, when I say gimmicks, I mean strong gimmicks. There are most gimmicks are really weak gimmicks. Like, there's a Shield Oracle, I think it's called, a minion that prevents damage to 1 minion, or there's a minion that prevents you from getting targeted by spells. There's some card draw gimmicks, like the Void Hunter, for example. Those are shit. Mind Warper is generally kind of weak as well. Ranged minions are... The problem with those minions is that they're gonna be awesome 1 time, and then they're gonna be shitty 3 times. So you'll win 1 game and be really happy about it and feel good about yourself, and then you're going to completely lose momentum a couple of times in a row. And what wins gauntlet runs isn't gimmicks that work some of the time, it's the consistency of those strong muscular minions. Avoid the gimmicks of Mechazor, except for some really efficient Mechazor plays, like the chassis is actually quite efficient, but avoid gimmicks like the Void Hunter card draw or flying minions, except for Magmar, which I will cover later, or Shield Oracles and shit like that. It's just... Be careful with ranged as well. Unless you really know what you're doing, they're probably should be used very rarely, and if so, use efficient ones at least, like Fire Spitter. Don't use the Sivir that deals only 1 damage anyway. It's just stupid. Unless you have no choice. Sometimes you have no choice and you have to pick the gimmicky one, but I avoid the gimmicks and I prioritize muscle. That's how I've been getting consistent results on the Gauntlet. Now let's get into some specifics. I've been screenshotting some of my winning runs. This is a winning run. I just can't screenshot a 9 wins because I only get a reward screen in there, so I screenshotted it at 7-0. This one I think went to 9-1. And the reason why I won this specific Vanar run I actually, the screenshot cut off, but I had some Duelyst Lords and Fenrir War Masters down there. Those are ridiculous. Those minions that spawn another minion are your highest priority because they are the efficient mid-game that will allow you to establish board control in a way that your opponent just can't keep up removing. It's really solid, and apart from that, the Rejuvenators have been doing a lot of work, the high hand, but mostly that 3 Hailstone Prisons allowed me to turn around every power move my opponent makes. All those Lionars that summon the Ironcliff Guardians, all these high hands and big golems from my opponent just got removed instantly, costing me only 2 mana for the Hailstone Prison, turning around the board control into my favor, and then using the... Goddamn, that is a terrible screenshot, and I should really learn how to do my job properly. But I also had some sisters in this deck, and sisters are a very important card to take. It's part of my win condition with Vanar. I basically established control of the mid game with those efficient, sticky minions like the Fenrir and Duelyst, and then and Hailstone Prison to shut down opponent's power plays, establish control of the mid-game, and then when he's on the run, I use the Sisters to change the positioning around and get lethal where he doesn't expect it. Sisters are really good for that. They can also allow you to remove a ranged minion or a gimmicky snowballing minion from your opponent. Like an early, what is he called, Chakra something, the one from Songhai that just grows when you cast spells. I don't play Songhai, I just kill those guys, didn't pay attention to their names ever, but gimmicky minions and ranged minions all die to the sister as well, because you can just swap positions and kill them with the hero. It's really good stuff. So take your sisters, take your sticky minions that summon other minions, get the Hailstone Prison every single time it shows up, no questions asked, no shit given. 3 Hailstone Prisons is your goal, 4 if you can. It's seriously so damn good. And make sure you control the mid game. It shouldn't be that hard. Chromatic Cold, not so good by the way, it's not efficient enough, but I really like the Flash Freeze. As 0 cost to swing them early and mid game around, maybe in the late game crowd control their biggest minion and find lethal with the sisters later on. It's totally worth picking up in my opinion. Now, moving on to Magmar, where I have actually, this is the latest screenshot I've made, so I actually learned to freaking cover every single card I have at least. Just do multiple screenshots and splash them together. Now this deck, I had my doubts about it, but it ended up in a 9-2. The Magmar's win condition is to brawl in the early game and mid game and then bring him down to like 10, 8 HP and then just finish him off with claws. If you can include one silhouette tracer in your deck to be able to surprise him with claws where he doesn't expect it because he's positioning himself against it. One silhouette tracer kept in your hand is, when never redrawn, is a pretty solid way to ensure surprise victories. And by the way, speaking of that, when you are redrawing, replacing cards in the Gauntlet, be more conservative with it than you are in the ladder. If you have a removal card, it's more precious than it would be in a ladder match because you have less of them. So be very careful with replacing your removal cards. You may not draw them again because you have fewer of them, you may want to keep them. Especially Hailstone Prison, never redraw your Hailstone Prisons, for example. And if you have that silhouette tracer, don't redraw him with Magmar unless you really have to, because it can give you a lethal later on in the game with some claws or Bounded Life Force. Now, Bounded Life Force is something you for some reason don't see on the ladder. It's an epic card that turns your stats into 10-10. And the funny thing about it is that people always expect you to use claws, which gives you 8 damage. So they're like, I'm 10 HP, I'm not gonna die to claws, let me just plant my face directly in front of Magmar. And then you play the Bounded Life Force and you have 10 damage all of a sudden, and I swear to you, Bounded Life Force is directly responsible for 3 victories out of the 9 in this run. Like a single card, 3 victories that otherwise wouldn't have happened. It's that good. Just take it. Nobody expects it. Everyone dies to it. Bounded Life Force is the shit, man. You want it. You want it. Also, the big power of Magmar lies in the Dire Tide Frenzy. It's like the Venar's Hailstone Prison. It's the card you always take when it shows up. You just do, because it's that good. Magmar has some decent removal, but in my opinion, you should prioritize Dire Tide Frenzy haste combos over things like Natural Selection. Eggmorph is more reliable than Natural Selection. I like my Eggmorphs. But the best way to remove the board lies in Dire Tide Frenzies and haste minions. Take your Tigers, take your Elucidators, take your Machinator Warbeasts, use them for removal, for controlling the board, for huge board swings. Set those up, keeping those cards in your hand, waiting for opportunities. Also, Magmar's the only faction for which flying minions are actually decently okay, like the Flame Wing and the Dread Flayer. It's still not as good as Haste Frenzy, but you can play those flying minions in the back of your hero and then use Dire Tide Frenzy on them, getting perfect positioning for that frenzy. Sometimes your opponents will position their minions so that you don't have access with your minions to the frenzy, but the flying minion can just fly wherever he wants, so that could be used for perfect frenzies, and to some degree it was serving me quite well. As you can see, this victorious deck has 3 Dire Tide Frenzies, and I regret nothing. 3 should be your goal. Should be what you aim for. 2 is the minimum for a successful deck. 4 is a little bit over the top and you may lose board control having too many buffs in your hand, but Dire Tide Frenzies are super solid, and so are the Greater Fortitudes. It costs only 1, so you can oftentimes just squeeze it in at the end of your turn, and it gives you very solid board control through creating powerful minions in your opening turns. I really like the opening of a 3-cost minion and the Greater Fortitude played on it. You basically have a mid-game beast on your first turn. It's amazing. Also, it can be used to squeeze in an even more powerful frenzy. So prioritize your fortitudes as well. It's very, very solid. So basically with Magmar, you win with Claws and Silhouette Tracer, and you win with Dire Tide Frenzy haste combos. This ridiculously undefeated Vitruvian deck, it was actually a 9-0. It took me totally by surprise that it was this good, but it was this good. And the reason it was this good... Shit, have I fucked up the screenshot again? This is pathetic. Yeah, I didn't catch the most important part of this deck, which was actually 4 Pyromancers. And I can't believe the screenshot didn't catch it and I didn't just make another one. I'm silly. But there are 4 Pyromancers in this deck. I guess you'll just have to take my word for it. And they were responsible for like 50% of my wins. Just almost all of my games begun with a Pyromancer. When you have 4 of them and you redraw aggressively, mulligan aggressively on your first turn, then you're pretty much gonna open with a Pyromancer. That is the only really reliable Vitruvian deck that I've managed to figure out for the Gauntlet, is you just basically spam Pyromancers in the early game to have really annoying openings that your opponent can't deal with. You take some free kills before he gets to you. Most of them don't have proper removal against it. Some of them do, like Lionar sometimes has True Strikes and those silences. But those silences are still not that efficient for Lionar. Songhai can get a 3 damage spell or the lightning, so Songhai is good against it. And Magmar sometimes has the mana burn, but other than that, it's a pain in the ass to deal with. And like I said, removals are more rare, are less likely to happen in the Gauntlet. And then for the mid-game, I just had 3 Scarabs. I don't give a shit. I just spammed those Scarabs in the mid-game. And they are so hard to deal with. They are the kings of the Gauntlet. The Scarabs are hilarious. Because they are a 4/7 minion for 5. Are you kidding me? a 4/7 minion. Even if you silence them out of their blast, they are still rock solid, they are still super powerful, they are still dominating. So after the second Scarab is played on the 6 mana turn, the opponents are generally just surrendering. I've had the biggest ratio of insta-surrenders rather than close games in this run. They basically just realize that they cannot possibly deal with the amount of blast I put on the field, and they just leave. It's ridiculous how the Pyromancers and Scarabs have just ruffled stomach. And it's a funny thing, my deck actually doesn't show any of it. I'm actually showing you the shitty part of the deck. And it goes to show that, yeah, it's okay when part of your deck can be shitty, like Crimson Oculus, Mechazords, and Death Blighter is actually solid. Death Blighter is another minion that you should totally consider for turnarounds. It's one of the few things that can give you a turnaround mid and late game. So Death Blighter should be on your radar as well for like decent mid-game minions, but there's a ton of crappy things here. Cosmic Flesh actually is surprisingly good and has been giving me some life-saving plays when I was forced to protect my early game Pyromancers with some random minion that I buffed with Cosmic Flash. Sometimes gave me really powerful blast minions through buffing their damage and HP. Like a Pyromancer with a Cosmic Flash is pretty much a freaking Scarab already, so it's like an evolution into a Scarab. It's really cool. Cosmic Flash, take 1 or 2 of them in your deck and you're not gonna regret it. It's pretty solid. I did not actually screenshot a Lionar because by the time I decided to make this tutorial, I've had the worst luck making Lionar decks. I either had crappy decks or I had a good deck and then I met ridiculously good players, so I don't actually have a Lionar screenshot, but I wanted to get this tutorial out anyway. What you do with Lionar is you basically take those really efficient fat minions like the Ironcliffe Guardian and the 3/6 God, what is she? Maiden, the 3/6 Maiden that is really hard to deal with. Make sure they can never kill your Maiden on their turn, and then you just trade for free on your turn. It's infuriating to deal with. It's really solid. Make sure you have those fat, high HP minions. The Golems are really good as well for Lionar. And then make sure your deck has at least 2, if not 3 Divine Bonds, which means you do prioritize those Divine Bonds above anything until you have 2 of them in your draft. Because you have to make sure it's your main win condition. You have to make sure you have them in your deck. They are what wins you games, and the efficient, overall beefy minions. It's pretty straightforward. Lionar basically plays in the Gauntlet like he plays in the ladder. Pretty straightforward. The removal is solid as well. The Tempest, the Holy Immolation and the True Strike are all very solid and you should totally take them. The Sunbloom is inferior to an Ephemeral Shroud, but it's better than the Templar. You should probably take it if you're like lacking the Shroud. If you really feel like you're lacking removal, you should take the Sunblooms, but they're like not super good. They're decent. They're decent in their value. And as far as Abyssian goes, I only had 1 successful Abyssian run. I find them very inconsistent. I mostly beat those Abyssians I meet in the Gauntlet. I very rarely lose to them because it's just not consistent enough. Abyssian is a deck of combos and you cannot build those combos in the ladder. The one thing, you cannot build those combos as efficient in the Gauntlet as you can in the ladder. Like, you cannot get your 3 dancers as you can on the ladder most times, for example. So you basically end up with half of your Shadow Creep combos and half of your Deathwatch combos, and nothing really comes together. The one really successful Abyssian deck I actually built was the Assassination deck, and that's the only thing you should aim for if you are actually building Abyssian, is just take every single Assassin you can get, every single Shadow Reflection you can get, every single Tiger you can get, and every single direct damage thing like Void Pulse you can get. Just build your deck around dealing 25 damage and make sure your opponent can do nothing about it because you just keep whacking him in the face all the time. That was the only thing that worked for me when I had 3 Assassins, 2 Shadow Reflections, 3 Void Pulses, and just whacked him in the face consistently all the time. That's the only thing that actually won me an Abyssian run, and then I just found them too inconsistent. And then when it comes to Songhai, well, I don't play Songhai. That one I will leave to much smarter Songhai players in the comments below this post on the YouTube comments, as well as the forums where I will publish this tutorial in the Duelyst forums in the strategy section. I basically find Songhai to be gimmicky and inconsistent, but I heard rumors that people who spammed a lot of masks and spells had ridiculous results. I heard rumors, I never cared to test them out. I just don't like Songhai as a faction. I don't enjoy the gimmicky nature of them. I don't know, but there's probably gonna be someone in the comments who will explain to you how to build a Songhai on the Gauntlet, but this here is how I have gotten very good, very consistent results on the Gauntlet, as consistent as they can get. Obviously, you still need to be a really good player, but at least now you know what to prioritize in your drafts. A lot of people post questions in my chat when I'm streaming of just what do I choose, these are my 3 cards, and I'm hoping this tutorial can clarify some of that. That's pretty much the biggest decisions you make in the Gauntlet, it's just what do you draft. So I hope you enjoyed, and hell, keep supporting the stream if you want more of those tutorials. This one's recorded as the reward for meeting the quarterly goal for the last quarter of 2015. When we meet more quarterly goals, when some Duelyst players keep throwing donations in my face, then I will also be taking care of this community and making Duelyst tutorials as opposed to other videos as rewards for each 33% of the quarterly goals. So thank you for your support. Thanks for watching. Hope you benefited. Joyful Rogue out.